Berlin. My name is Dirk Eens, and I'm very glad you have shown up for this book presentation of War and Mosler. We have also here from Lola Books Carlos, who's the editor of the book publishing company. Warren Mosler is an economist and also an investor who has a lot of experience working with central banks. He had owned his own car company and also a bank. He ran a bank. And most importantly, he's the creator of modern monetary theory, well, one of the founders of it. So him and Bill Mitchell were the economists that started this modern monetary theory. And I think the book is a very nice introduction into this kind of new thinking about economics. So probably you are aware of this crisis that we had, and we need basically to rethink, especially monetary macroeconomics, because apparently almost nobody saw it coming, apart from some economists who actually did publish some very good stuff about the crisis and what could happen. And all of this was basically based on balance sheets. So people discussing balance sheets, what could happen, what are the scenarios. And this is very important, I think, to note that when economics fails, you need to rebuild it. And I think that Warren Mosler is fundamental in this challenge to stand up and rebuild economics. Before we have a presentation by Warren Mosler, I would like to ask Carlos to present or to say a couple of words on behalf of the publisher. So,
Vielen Dank, vielen Dank, die Bard College Berlin. Ich habe eine Rede auf Deutsch vorbereitet, so wenn ihr nichts dagegen habt, musste ich auf Deutsch die Rede halten, weil ansonsten sollte ich alles auf Englisch im Kopf übersetzen. Das wahrscheinlich schaffe ich nicht. Was konnte ich als Verleger über Warren Mosler und sein Buch sagen? In meinen Augen ist Warren Mosler mit diesem Buch so eine Art aufgeklärter Held geworden. Dieses Buch war der Ursprung einer neuen Wirtschaftswissenschaftstheorie, die Bill Mitchell, der das Vorwort zur deutschen Fassung schrieb, als moderne Währungstheorie bezeichnete, Modern Monetary Theory. Aber ist es legitim, Warren Mosler einen aufgeklärten Helden zu nennen? Alleine ein Einführungsbuch zu schreiben reicht nicht aus, um sich eine solche Zuschreibung zu verdienen. Warren Mosler aber ist ein aufgeklärter Held unserer Zeit, weil er mit diesem Buch das Motto Sapere aude, das Immanuel Kant zum Wahlspruch der Aufklärung machte, neu entdeckte. Dieses Buch stellt vor allem anderen eine Herausforderung an die Vernunft dar. In diesem Sinne ist das Buch für aufgeklärte Denker geschrieben. Nur diejenigen, die imstande sind, ihre eigenen Vorurteile zu überwinden, werden dieses Buch vollumfänglich verstehen können. Dieses Werk stellt einen Paradigmenwechsel dar. Die sieben unschuldigen, aber tödlichen Betrügereien der Wirtschaftspolitik zwingen den Leser, seine wirtschaftlichen Vorkenntnisse zu überdenken. Er wird dabei herausfinden, dass alles oder fast alles, was er zu wissen geglaubt hat, falsch war. Ich muss auch zugeben, dass ich diese Herausforderung an die Vernunft selbst erlebt habe. Als ich dieses Buch zum ersten Mal gelesen habe, erlebte ich eine tiefe und andauernde Wertekrise. Als Verleger fiel es mir einfach, eine Entscheidung zu treffen. Ich musste unbedingt das Buch veröffentlichen. Als Bürger fiel mir die Entscheidung nicht so einfach. Der Schluss, zu dem ich gekommen bin, ist ein doppelter. Der Leser dieses Buches kann entweder den Weg der Aufklärung gehen, oder aber er bleibt im gegenwärtigen wirtschaftlichen Chaos stecken. Wenn der Leser dem Weg der Aufklärung folgt, muss er den Mut haben, sich seines eigenen Verstandes zu bedienen. Die andere Option bedeutet, sich für die geistliche Faulheit zu entscheiden. Diese zweite Option kann gemütlicher sein, aber angesichts der aktuellen Krise, die Millionen Menschen unnötiges Leid und Arbeitslosigkeit brachte, hoffe ich, dass niemand sich für diesen entscheiden wird. Vielen Dank.
Okay, so let me try to translate this basically at heart. So, Carlos has said in his eyes, Warren Mosler is kind of hero, an enlightened hero, by publishing this book. The book was the origin of a new kind of monetary science, which Bill Mitchell, who wrote the preface of the German version, called modern monetary theory. But is it legitimate to call Warren Mosler an enlightened hero? Just to write an introduction into modern monetary money is not enough to basically get such kind of praise. But Warren Mosler is an enlightened hero of our time, because with this book he took the motto Sapere Aude, which Immanuel Kant made the motto of the Enlightenment. He rediscovered this. So this book is a challenge to establish reason. And in this sense, the book is basically written for enlightened thinkers, and only those who are able to overcome their prejudices will really understand this book. So this book presents a change of paradigm. The 7 deadly innocent frauds of economic policy force the reader to reconsider prior knowledge, and the reader will probably find out that everything or almost everything that he or she thought that he or she knew is wrong. So I have to admit that this challenge to reason is something which occurred to myself. As I read this book for the first time, I fell into a crisis of values. As a publisher, it was easy for me to understand that I have to publish this book. As a citizen, it was not so easy. So the conclusion to which I came is a double conclusion. The reader of this book can choose to go along the way of enlightenment, or can choose to basically stick to the established economic chaos. If the reader follows the way of enlightenment, he or she has to have the courage to use reason, to reason their own reasons. So the other option, of course, means that you choose intellectual laziness. And I hope that, well, even though the second option can be more convenient, well, in face of the actual crisis that we still have, with millions of people suffering because of unemployment, I hope that nobody chooses to choose this road. Okay, so, well, thank you for Warren Mosler to appear here at Bard College Berlin, so I would ask you to clap for me.
Okay, thank you for that introduction and the invitation and everyone who set this up. And here we go. And I changed my own slides, right? Okay, oops. I've never done this in German before, so. Okay, so, and I call these innocent frauds because they're so simple that if you give the person the option of being innocent rather than being fraud, that's even worse, because it implies he's just a blithering idiot, right? So, John Kenneth Galbraith Sr., John Kenneth Galbraith used that in his book, The Economics of Innocent Fraud, and I liked it. Okay, the first thing, federal government is not constrained by revenues. Now, let me begin by saying this was written in 2010 when I was running for the U.S. Senate in Connecticut, and everyone said you have to have a book if you're going to run for office so you can have people go read your book. So I wrote this book. It's the only book I've ever written, probably the only book I ever will write. And it's oriented towards the US at that time. However, it's absolutely true and valid for any monetary system that's ever existed. Okay, so including the European Union. So I'll be attempting to put that in the context a little bit of the European Union as we go along. And I've got 45 minutes, so I'm going to keep track of the time. Oh, there it is, elapsed time. Very good. Okay, so the government can always make any and all payments in its own currency, no matter how large the deficit is or how few taxes it collects. And that is not the first innocent fraud. This thing is not giving me... Okay. Now we're starting at the beginning. The federal government must raise funds through taxing or borrowing in order to spend. In other words, government spending is limited by its ability to tax or borrow. President Obama stated publicly the United States has run out of money, and now we have to rely on borrowing money. And he had a delegation that he'd go to China, our bankers, to make sure we could borrow money to fund our government. Okay? You've had every nation in Europe has run out of money and has to cut expenditures or increase taxes to be able to spend, or it's not allowed to spend. Right? Okay. This is a myth that's causing serious problems. It's not possible for a government with its own currency to run out of money. So let's look at where money comes from. And I'll start with the US dollar, and let's go back to 1979. I was working in Chicago at a company called William Blair & Company, a finance company, an investment banking company, and I was running their government bond arbitrage department. And my back office guy gives me a call, and he says, hey, the Federal Reserve just made a mistake. Instead of giving us $30,000, they gave us $300 million. There's $300 million in our bank account. Now, back in 1979, that was a lot of money. I said, it's fantastic, let's go spend it. He said, well, it's 4 o'clock, we have to wait till tomorrow. So how much interest are we going to earn overnight? At the time, interest rates were high, $100,000. That was a lot of money to make in one day in 1979. I said, great. Well, a couple of hours later, he called me back. Yeah, they found their mistake, and I had to send the money back. I said, well, what happened? How did we get $300 million? He said, well, back then they had machines at the Fed, and they would punch the numbers. It was a mechanical machine, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Then they had 0, 00, and 000 in these calculators to help them along. And he had accidentally hit the 000 instead of the 0 or the 00, and accidentally sent us $300 million instead of $30,000. But that was real money. Okay, now he didn't get the money from China. He didn't tax anybody. Okay, he didn't call up the IRS and say, send me this money first. He just typed it in, sent it to us, and that was real money. So where does the US dollar come from? Where do dollars come from? They come from the thumb of the machine operator at the Federal Reserve Bank. He's just changing the numbers in our bank account. We had 0, and all of a sudden he changes it, and we have 3 with a bunch of zeros. That's all it is. That's where the money comes from. So let's look at Greece. Greece calls the European Central Bank and says, please credit the account of the IMF for $500 billion to pay off the loan. And now, one of two things can happen. The ECB, which in this case is a bank of Greece, but it's just a branch, they can say, certainly, credit the account, type in the number, and the loan is paid. Or they can say, no, we're not going to do that. Why not? Well, your account balance is 0, and I'm going to have to account for what I do. If I give them 500 billion, I'm going to have to account for the 500 billion by euro by changing your account down. And you don't have any, I'm not going to do that. Okay, I'm not going to give you that kind of a loan. Now notice how the decision's being made. It's not about how much money he has. It's not about how many euro he has. He just changes numbers up and he changes numbers down. It's about whether he wants to do it or not. It's a political decision. All decisions to make payment are ultimately, in euro, from the central bank, are ultimately political. Okay, now he said, no, you can't do this unless you cut your public spending, you raise value-added tax, you go through it. Now, okay, now I'll push the buttons for you. Okay, but it wasn't because he ran out of money. There was no such thing. And so the idea that the government can run out, per se, has just been an enormous obstacle for policy. Everybody believes it, everybody understands it, all the world leaders repeat it, and the media never challenges them on it. Okay, so now, and that is the first deadly innocent fraud in the book. Okay, so this works and this doesn't. Okay, that's why I'm flicking around. This page is flicking around. Okay, federal government spending is in no case operationally constrained. He can always push the buttons. Okay, there's no solvency risk. Everybody has thought Japan is going to go broke. Their debt to GDP is 220%. Okay, and their interest rates have been zero, right? And they're saying, well, if the interest rates ever go up, the payments will surely put them over the edge. Well, how do they make payments every month when the bonds come due? They just type the money in the same way any other central bank does. They do what's called debiting securities accounts and crediting reserve accounts. They shift the dollars from being bonds to the yen from being bonds to being yen deposits. There's no such thing as the Bank of Japan not being able to make a payment. And yet you'll see in the newspaper all these hedge fund managers betting that Japan's going to go broke. Large amounts of money, and they've been wrong for 20 years, and they keep saying it's just a matter of time. The trade is called the widowmaker trade. They've lost so much money on it. It's just not possible. Now, Japan could decide not to make a payment, yes. Okay, so what you have to separate is the ability to pay from willingness to pay. Standard & Poor's downgraded Japan from AAA to something less than Botswana at one point in time. And they, and they did it on their ability to pay. And I called the guy up, David Beers, started talking to him about it. And he agreed by the end of the conversation that yes, it was about willingness to pay and not ability to pay. But he did not change his analysis that he had printed. Okay. If you ever see David, say hello for him. The federal government can always make any payments in its own country, no matter how large, no matter what the taxes are, no matter what the interest rate is. Okay. Next thing, with government deficits, we're leaving this debt to our children. Again, President Obama, and at the time, Romney was running against him. Why can't I think of his first name? Mitt Romney was running against him. And now Donald Trump, and every dollar we spend, we have to realize we're borrowing it from China, and our grandchildren are going to have to pay it back. Does any generation have to pay anything back in real terms, goods and services, to a previous generation? Okay, and so think of it this way. When our children 20 years from now build 20 million cars, are they going to have to send them back to 2015 to pay the debt? Okay, of course not. There is no such thing. In 20 years from now, no matter what the debt is or isn't, if our children build 20 million cars, whoever's alive gets to drive the cars. Okay, now who drives the cars will be a political decision at that time. If they say, well, there's a lot of debt, so these people can't drive the cars and these people can, they can say that. Or they can change their minds and change it around any way they want. That's what the entire legal structure and legislative structure does. It ultimately decides who has to build the cars and who gets to drive the cars. And that's subject to change and subject to adjustment by each generation. Nobody is burdened by what happened now on that score. Okay. What they are burdened by is whether they have the machinery and the know-how to build cars, whether there's any fuel left, whether we'll be able to breathe the air at that time. There are a lot of those kinds of problems, but not the money. Okay. Now let's look at it in accounting terms. What is the public debt? So when the government spends, what do they actually do? We already know that. They just change the numbers up in your account. So I'm I've got my computer up. This is my computer screen, right? And I bring up my account at my bank, and I've got $5,000 in my account. And today is the first of the month, and I'm going to get my Social Security money. And I'm supposed to get $2,000. So I watch my account closely all day, 5,000, 5000, then all of a sudden, blip, and it says 7000. Ah, I got my money. So what did the government do? All they did was change the 5 into a 7. Okay, and I got paid. So when the government spends, it changes numbers up. What does the government do when it taxes? The government says you owe $3,000 in tax. I write a check, I send it in, I'm watching my account, 7000. All of a sudden, blah, the 7 turns into a 4. They subtracted it. They changed the number on my account. Did they get anything? Did some gold coin drop into a bucket? There's some pile of money pile up somewhere and they run into the next room. Does anything move through the computer? No. Have you ever gotten very, very close to a TV screen when you're watching it? Is anybody moving? No. There's just dots coming on and off. There are no people running and playing football on your TV. They're just dots coming on and off. The central bank, your money, there's nothing moving around. They're just numbers being changed up and down. They're just scorekeeping. If we're in a card game and I'm the scorekeeper, and how many points do I have? I don't have any points. Well, if you get a good hand and you get 100 points, where do I get them from? I don't get them from anywhere. I just write them down in your account. And if you have a bad hand and I take away 100 points, do I have more to give to the next person? Of course not. The central bank has a spreadsheet. It's worth about $100. And all they do is put all the names of the banks and they change the numbers up and down. And they make sure they balance, they account for what they do. But there's nothing moving around. They're just changing up and down. Okay, so I'm going to get to the accounting thing about leaving this number on this spreadsheet to our children. What is a deficit? What is the public debt? The public debt is when they change more numbers up than they change down. So if I spend $10,000, I'm the federal government. Did you catch that, Elizabeth? It's me, I'm the federal government. If I'm the federal government and I spend $10,000 and I credit your account for $10,000 and I tax your account for $5,000, I change your number up, I change your number down, the accountants look at what I did at the end of the day and they say, ah, deficit. Okay, you spent more than you taxed. Okay. Now, if I look at the total economy, I spent $10,000, I taxed $5,000, I changed the numbers up 10, I changed them down 5, there's still $5,000 left in the economy. That's the public debt. It starts out in checking accounts. The government credits your checking account first at the Federal Reserve. It's actually your bank's checking account, but it's the same thing. They call those reserve accounts. Federal Reserve Bank, reserve account. If they called it a checking account, it might be easier for people to understand, but they give it a fancy name. It's a reserve account. And then what they do is they offer government securities for sale. They're government bonds. Over here they're called OATs and BTPs and BOONs. Well, what are they? Well, when you buy one, what do? You send your money to the central bank, which means they subtract the money out of your account, right? It doesn't fly through the air. They just subtract it from your account. And they give you a credit in a different account called a BOON or called a CCT or something. It's nothing more than a different bank account at the same central bank. But this one pays a certain amount of interest. Okay, that's all it is. So what they do is they spend the $10,000, they tax 5, there's 5,000 left out there. They move that from a checking account to a savings account. A securities account is nothing more than a savings account. If you buy a bond, you send the money, you get it back with interest. Same as any other bank. You buy a savings account, give them money, you get it back with interest. They give it a fancy name, they call it a government security. It's just a savings account. So they spend, it goes into checking accounts, they sell bonds, it shifts from checking to savings. That's the public debt. It's the euros that are held in savings accounts at the central bank, okay? And what are the euros? They're just credit numbers, but what are they? They're the thing that can be used to pay taxes. They're tax credits. They're nothing more than a tax credit at the end of the day. You can buy something, sell it, they move around, but they stay in the economy until somebody uses them to pay taxes to the government, and then they're out of the economy. Other than that, they're just going from one person to another. So they're ultimately tax credits, the thing needed to pay taxes. The public debt is nothing more than all the money spent by the government that has not yet been used to pay taxes. It's the outstanding tax credits. Now, how do a bunch of outstanding tax credits burden any generation? It's like, they don't. The government pays interest on the tax payment. Why? On the tax credits. With more tax credits. Well, why do they do that? How do they do it? The central bank has a meeting and decides how much interest to pay. We're going to pay, right now it's negative, they actually take away money. But they could decide to pay 5% interest for whatever reason. It's a political decision. Okay, and so those tax credits will earn interest, more tax credits. Well, how is that burdening anybody? What is there to pay back? How are bonds paid back in the economy? Because you hear about bonds having to be paid back all the time. So I'll go to the United States first. When Treasury securities have to be paid back, what do they actually do in the Federal Reserve? And I've been there, I visit, I talk to the people. They all know this. They subtract the money from your securities account, your Treasury bond account, and they add it to your reserve account at the Federal Reserve. They take the money out of savings and put it into your checking account. They say, if you want to do anything from there, let us know. Okay. So, to go into debt, the government puts money in your checking account, moves it to your savings account. To pay off the debt, they move the dollars from your savings account back to your checking account. That's all paid. There are no grandchildren and no taxpayers in the room when they move the money from savings to checking. They subtract the number in one and they add it to the other. And they do this for $50 billion a month in the United States or whatever matures every month. And there's no incident, there's no drama, there can't possibly be. It's just a debit and a credit. Okay, that's called paying back the debt. The tax credits are still outstanding, but instead of being in bond accounts, they're in checking accounts. It's like, okay. Now, once they're in a checking account, what can you do with that? Can you take it out? Well, you could get green pieces of paper which have the same number. It's just a different kind of receipt. Instead of being on your computer screen, they'll give you a green piece of paper that says how much money you have, right? Dollar, actual cash. Or you can buy something, and they move it from your checking account to somebody else's checking account. Or you could buy another Treasury security, and they'll put it back in the savings account, right? That's all there is. It's a simple spreadsheet. Okay. So the whole idea of leaving some kind of a burden to the children is complete nonsense. You're not doing that. Okay, what you're doing is shifting around real resources between people today when you tax and spend and do all these other things. Yes, you're shifting things between people who are alive. But in 20 years, the people who are alive then have full political power to do it any way they want to do it at that time. They're not beholden to anything that happens now. Yet every politician says they are. And have you ever heard the news media challenge President Obama or anybody else talking about burdening the next generation? No. Debt or no debt, our children get to consume whenever they can produce. It's that simple. There's another good one. Federal government deficits take away your savings. Okay. You hear this all the time. The money has to come from somewhere. The government borrows it from the population. Now they don't have it to do anything, and then they spend it. Well, first of all, on their terms, whoever's saying this, they borrow it and then they spend it, it's still there in the economy. They haven't taken anything away, right? The other thing is, when they borrow the money, are they taking anything away? If you have euro and you put your money, your euro, in a savings account at a bank, did that bank take your money away? Or do you still have your money, but it's in a savings account earning interest? Well, for all practical purposes, you still have your money. It's just earning interest in a savings account at the bank. They didn't take it away. If you buy a government security, your money's now in a savings account at the central bank, earning interest, and then they will pay it back. They'll put it back in your checking account at the date that you contracted. If you bought a one-year security, it goes to your savings account, and they'll put it back in your checking account a year later. Did they take your money away from you in order to do something? Do you have less money to spend? No. You made that decision for whatever reason. Okay, and it's got nothing to do with the government knocking on your door and saying, hey, sorry, we're going to take your money, you can have it back in a year because we need it. It's got nothing to do with that. Okay, you still got it. And then, in any case, they spend it. And then once they spend it, somebody has that money too, also. Okay, so if somebody puts their money in a savings account, you still got it, it's just in a savings account. And then they spend that much, which means they change somebody else's number up, right? Your number gets, in your checking account goes down, the number in your savings account goes up, and then they put money in somebody else's checking account. So now the economy has both the checking account and the new savings, the new checking account and the new savings account. All right, so I decide to, I'm the government, I decide to spend $10,000. Oh, we're gonna have to start over now.
Why didn't you wait for me?
I told them we should have. Okay, so we'll go back to our example of the government spending $10,000. And I'm going to say it the wrong way around first, and then I'll say it the right way around. I'll say it the way the other people do. First, they borrow $10,000, and somebody puts their $10,000 in, and so the $10,000 goes from somebody's checking account to somebody's savings account at the Federal Reserve. Okay. Then they spend the $10,000, that's called borrowing. Move your money from checking to savings, that's called borrowing. Then they spend the money, which means they put it in somebody else's checking account at the Federal Reserve. Okay, and now the government has spent $10,000, it hasn't taxed anything, and it's borrowed $10,000 by moving 10 from a checking to a savings. There's now $20,000 in the economy. The amount in the economy went from 10,000 up to 20 because of the new spending. The old money that got borrowed is still money. It's just in a savings account instead of a checking account. And even though you have savings accounts, you can still actually spend that money. You can take it out early, you can borrow against it, you can sell it. They're totally liquid. And again, not that that matters. Now, let me say it the right way around, and then I'll explain why it's the right way around. The government spends the $10,000 first. It doesn't borrow it first, it spends it first. So there's no money in the economy. I spend $10,000 without taxing anybody. That's deficit spending. It goes into a checking account. Then that person moves it from checking to savings, which we call buying government debt, right? And so that $10,000 is now in a savings account. That $10,000 in the savings account, called the Treasury security, did not exist before. It existed after the government spent the money, and then it moved from checking to savings. Now, why do I say the government spends first before it taxes or borrows? So Elizabeth and I were in Pompeii a few months ago, and the guide was showing us the coins that they had from 2,000 years ago. And he said it was a wonderful place to live. People were in line trying to get in. There would be a line, waiting list to get into Pompeii. It's like today's gated communities, right? And what they would do was they would tax people, and they'd pay the taxes with these coins, and then they would spend the money on public services. So they had clean streets and fresh water and sanitation, and they had pressure washers and cleaned the walls and everything else. It was a wonderful place to live. So I said to the guy, well, actually the government spent the coins first and then collected them. He goes, no. They collect the coins and then they spend them. That's how it works. So I said, well, where did the coins come from? He says, well, the government made them. I said, well, then how did anybody get the coins to pay the taxes? He goes, so they spent them first and then they collected them? I go, yeah, how else can it work? He walks away. Okay. The government has to spend first before it collects the coin. All the dollars, all the euros used to pay taxes have to initially come from the government, and I'll show you where, or else they're counterfeit. If they're not counterfeit, they came from the government. Now, inside the central banks, the way they say it, they have different set of vocabulary. They say you can't do a reserve drain without doing a reserve add. Okay. Reserve drain means nobody can pay anything to the government until after you do a reserve add, which means until after the government gives money to the economy. They have to spend first before they can collect anything. And they all know that. They all have these operations to make sure they do this so they don't cause a problem by not doing it. So when the Treasury is borrowing all this money, the central bank's in there spending it. Now they do it on what's called a repo operation, or they buy securities. They've got different technical ways to do it, but they're spending first before they borrow. They're spending first before they collect tax, because that's where the funds come from. So think about the euro. If you go way back, some of you look old enough to remember before there were euro, marks and lira and everything else, you could not have borrowed any euro, back before there were any euro. Nobody had any. So one day they're taxing in marks and borrowing marks, and then the next day they're borrowing and taxing in euro. Well, where did the euro come from? The central bank bought the money supply. They came in and said, we're buying all your marks. They called it exchanging. They were buying them. And they told you the price. There was a conversion rate. I don't know, what was it? Was it 2 to 1 or something? Anybody remember? About 2 to 1?
Yeah.
Okay, so for every 2 marks, we'll give you 1 euro. And it was pretty much not voluntary, because if you didn't, the marks would be worth nothing if you didn't exchange it. So everybody exchanged it. And all the bank deposits in marks became bank deposits in euro, because the central bank bought them. So they spent first. They bought all the marks. Now you had the whole money supply, or the transactional money supply, in euro instead of marks. And now there was funds to pay taxes and funds for the government to borrow. So now they could borrow and then spend. But they came from the government. They have to. There's no other source for the existence. Their credit's on the central bank's computer. And nobody else can sneak into the central bank and drop a credit onto the computer. It has to be put on by the central bank. They run their own spreadsheet. So, in fact, budget deficits add to savings by that exact amount. If the deficit is $1 trillion, that adds $1 trillion net financial assets denominated in dollars to the economy. And there'll be a combination, some combination of cash, actual cash, reserves, or securities. Now they can switch between those three, but the total will always be the public debt. It will always equal the cumulative deficit spending to the last penny. It can't come from anywhere else. So in Pompeii, if those people were saving coins, how did they get them? The government must have spent more than they collected. They must have been running deficits. Otherwise, how would they have found coins for people? They would have all been used to pay taxes. They wouldn't have had them. Unless they found them in the government coffers. They did. They found them in probably private houses. Okay. What was the secret of Pompeii's success? They were deficit spending. They were spending more coins than they were collecting. Well, why not? The coins didn't cost them anything. And if they have a tax and people want to earn more than they need to pay the tax and they want to save, fine. What's the problem? They had jobs for everybody. There was no restriction. Why should there be? If somebody wants to work for these silly coins, come and work. If there were too many people, they lower the tax. Right? They didn't have an unemployment problem. Our pension fund, Social Security, it's broken. Massive political debate, particularly in 2010, maybe worse now, over whether this trust fund is broken and it's a government payment. How can the government not be able to make a payment? All they do is credit your account. All they do is change the number up in your account. Of course they can always make it. The guy changing the number ups, making the Social Security payments, he doesn't even have the phone number of the guy at the tax man who's collecting taxes. They don't even know each other. It doesn't matter. If he spends more than the other guy taxes, the accountants will say, oh, there's a deficit. But they don't, it doesn't constrain the operation. They've got a trust fund, which is a scorecard that says how much he's paid out and how much he's taken in. And what happens when that goes to zero? Does some bell ring or something? It just keeps going. Now there's a legislation passed by Congress saying you can't do that. There are self-imposed constraints. But there's nothing, it's not running out of money. There is no such thing. And it's been driving policy. The government was shut down over debates about how to properly fund the government in its own currency so it would make these payments. If they collected more taxes, they'd have more money to be able to make payments. This is complete nonsense. There just is no such thing. And that's what this book is about. It goes through these types of things. It's the same thing in Europe. Why is there a 3% limit? Why is it on the annual deficits and 60% of the debt? Why isn't it 4% and 70? Why isn't it 5% and 80? Whatever. It's a political decision. It's not because the central bank has run out of money or the government's king. Right now, since 2012, when Draghi said we'll do what it takes to prevent default, suddenly all the bonds are money good. Even Italian bonds are negative interest rates. Okay, so there's no funding issue. There's no actual funding issue. There's no actual need for the currency. They're just changing numbers up and they've eliminated one of the political obstacles, which was the fact that governments had been cut off and had to fund themselves, which I won't get into right now. But that's all been eliminated. It's all gone. There is no restriction in anybody's ability to spend except the conditionality of the central bank. The central bank says if you don't comply with all the standards, we're not going to credit your account. Sorry. Okay, it's that simple. And they do it indirectly, of course. But that's what they did to Greece. Greece was talking about not doing this. What we're talking about, central bank starts talking about not doing that. And all of a sudden, Greece can't fund themselves. Okay? But it was political. As soon as Greece said, okay, well then everything's fine. It's not about the markets per se. It's about these political decisions. Federal government checks don't bounce. Okay. It's a good way to put it. Glad I thought of that. So I was at the central bank. I was at a meeting in Australia, and there was a head of research, David Gruen, was there from the central bank. And my topic was government checks don't bounce. And the Australians were an interesting group of economists because they'd been giving me a hard time about this and back and forth. And so it was kind of a setup where they had this conference with about 30 people and somebody from the central bank. So now we're going to have the showdown. So I talk about what I just said. David raises his hand. He says, well, you know, if the interest rate on the debt is higher than the rate of growth in the economy, then it's unsustainable. So I go, okay, David, you know, I'm an operational type of guy. What do you mean by unsustainable? Do you mean that if the interest rate is high and someday the number they're going to have to type into credit an account is so large they won't be able to do it? You know, they're going to get an electric shock or something and can't print the number? And he tries to make a little, there was dead silence in the room. I mean, the people were, this was a big showdown after 4 or 5 years with Bill Mitchell going to conferences. And was it in Canberra? I think it was in Canberra. So he tries to make a little joke. He says, oh, I didn't know I had to rethink how the central bank clearing works at this meeting. And like, nobody laughs, it's quiet. And he finally, after a few more seconds, he goes, well, no, we'll clear the check. The check won't bounce, he said, but it'll cause the currency to go down and there'll be inflation. Okay, wrong answer, Dave. I mean, it's the right answer, it's the truth. But that's not what these people want to room, you know. Okay, and then the check will bounce, it will clear. So I said, well, David, I think the pensioners who are being told that the government's run out of money and has to cut back, I don't think that's what they're worrying about, that if they get paid, the currency might go down and there might be inflation. I think they're worried about not getting paid. You know, that's the message they're getting from the government. And he goes, no, they're worried about inflation and currency depreciation. And the head of the department, Martin Watt, was there from Newcastle. He goes over to David and he goes, the hell they are, David. And David backs down. I think he'd been one of the students. He goes, well, okay, maybe they are worried about getting their checks. All right. So anyway, after that, the whole mood down in Australia changed. That was kind of a turning point. But the point is, government checks don't bounce. Okay, the trade deficit is an unsustainable imbalance that takes away jobs and output. That's the myth. Okay, and it's actually true because of the policy response to the trade deficits, not because of the trade deficit per se. So in the United States, well, first of all, let's look at imports and exports and real wealth of a country. So let's think about your real wealth and think of it as your pile of stuff. Okay. So what is your pile of stuff for any country? Well, it's everything you can build and produce domestically. That adds to your pile. Everything you can build and keep, right? Plus, anything the rest of the world sends to you, that makes your pile bigger. Minus whatever you have to send out to the rest of the world. That makes your pile smaller. So it's production plus imports minus exports. That's what you're left with to live your life. Okay, we're not talking about the money, we're talking about the real goods and services. Okay, so in real terms, living your life, exports are the cost of imports. Exports are the real cost. You have to send that to somebody else. Imports are the real benefit. Now we all know imports are benefits and exports are costs from, you know, let's look at what war reparations are. Like, what does the winner do? When Caesar conquered Gaul, Gaul had to send wheat to Rome. Rome didn't send wheat to him. You know, the winner gets the wheat. The loser has to send the wheat, right? Okay. that's the way it works. I mean, it's obvious, right? And so, but we've set up the monetary system such that this has gotten lost. So let's start out, we've got the real terms here, where the imports are the benefits and the exports are the real costs. And another way to look at that is, let's assume exports are supposed to be, the best thing ever. Let's say you exported everything you produced and didn't import anything. You got 100% export surplus, right? Okay, well, what do you have left? Nothing. What happens to the population? Everybody dies. There's no food, there's no clothing, you can't turn the heat on, there's nothing. You just exported everything you made, you have nothing left. Okay, so obviously, if you get the extreme case, exports are taking things away from you and you have nothing left, you're gonna die. Okay. Now, if all you did was import everything and you didn't have to work, and you didn't produce anything, you're living pretty well for as long as it goes on. You don't even have to work, and you can just be out playing tennis and golf and having parties all the time, and you never have to work. So clearly, I like to say that economics is the opposite of religion. In economics, it's better to receive than to give. So, given that, this thing keeps flashing on me. What about this take away jobs things? Well, it's sort of true. Okay, because if you get imports, those people who are producing and people buy the imports instead of the domestic product, then you lose those jobs. And then you lose that income and those people can't afford to live. Okay. However, once you understand the other innocent frauds, you realize the appropriate policy response to more import is to make sure the people domestically have enough money to buy everything they can, to buy everything that's produced domestically, plus everything that's being imported. Okay, and I'll give you an example with the United States in 1999. In 1999, the United States had record imports, $380 billion worth of imports, back when that was a lot of money. I remember those days. Okay. And our unemployment rate was under 4%, it was like 3.7%. So how was that possible? Why did all those jobs, and a lot of jobs went overseas, 380 billion worth of stuff was produced by millions and tens of millions of people that weren't Americans overseas, and yet our unemployment rate was 3.7%. We had enough money to spend domestically, so we could buy everything we could produce at full employment, 3.7 unemployment, plus enough money to buy all the imports. Okay. Now, if we hadn't had enough money to do that, then yes, if we bought the imports instead of the domestic product, then there'd be unemployment. But if you keep taxes low enough, or government spending high enough, depending on your politics, run the correct size deficit, make sure your population has enough money to buy everything it can produce at full employment, plus whatever the rest of the world wants to send, then you're not losing any jobs. In fact, you're getting better jobs, which is exactly what happened in 1999. Now, the interesting thing was, the government was also running a budget surplus. How could that happen? And the answer was the private sector back then was going into debt like crazy, 7% of GDP. It was a huge private sector credit expansion. That's where the money was going. People were borrowing to spend on housing, borrowing to spend to fund these ridiculous .com balance sheets, impossible balance sheets, in huge numbers. And that was creating enough spending money, enough balances in accounts, borrowing to spend, to be able to buy all the domestic product at full employment plus the imports. In the year 2000, the domestic credit was cut off. It crashed. It ended. There wasn't enough income to support it. All of a sudden, there wasn't enough money to buy both. And all of a sudden, unemployment shot way up. And what's the proper answer? You either lower taxes or increase public spending to let the government make up that spending gap that opened up because private sector suddenly cannot conduct its own deficit spending to sustain itself. Okay. So, is it an unsustainable imbalance? Well, let's look at what the imbalance actually is. What's happening when you run a trade deficit is that the foreign sector has decided to save your money. Okay. So, the United States was running a $300 billion trade deficit. Yeah, I got about 5 minutes. And so what happened was the rest of the world was trying to accumulate $380 billion. They were willing to sell us $380 billion worth of stuff take the money and not spend it. And they built $380 billion of foreign exchange reserves. Because they were happy sending us, taking the money and not spending it. Okay? And how long can that go on? As long as they want to keep doing that. 15 years later, they're still doing it. Our trade deficit is still $400 or $500 billion a year. China is still building their foreign exchange reserves. Japan's building them. Everybody's trying to build dollar reserves. And now they're having problems and they're losing them. The Mideast is all building dollar reserves. Their whole goal in life is to pile up these US tax credits for whatever reason. Somebody's making money on it, right? Political influences. And so as long as they're willing to do that, the other side of that ledger is our trade deficit. So you can run a trade deficit for as long as the rest of the world wants to accumulate your currency. And that can be forever. It's been a while, and it may end tomorrow. But it's a good thing. And the fact that it might end someday doesn't mean you shouldn't do it now. If you want to start sending me money, go ahead and send it in. I'm not going to say no because someday you might stop. All right? Okay. Imports are real benefits, exports are real costs. Trade deficits directly improve our standard of living. They make our pile larger. Jobs are lost because taxes are too high for a given level of spending, not because of imports. It's the policy response. We need savings to provide the funds for investment. And this will be, the last one's very short. This is completely backwards. Okay. Investment, borrowing creates bank accounts, bank deposits, it creates savings. The savings comes from borrowing, it doesn't come from anywhere else, or it comes from government deficit spending. It comes from somebody's deficit spending. Okay, so if you go, and the way I used to explain it is, if you go to the bank, Francis Kavanaugh, Treasury Secretary for 30 years, or Treasury Chief Economist for 30 years, wrote a book. He came, gave us a little lecture at University of Missouri, Kansas City. He said, old people's savings are funding young people's mortgages. Old people are taking their savings, put it in the bank, and the bank makes money. I said, gee, you know, Frank, it's actually the other way around. The old person has to sell their house to the young person to get savings. The young person goes to the bank, borrows $200,000. The bank creates a loan, gives the young person the $200,000 in his account. He puts it in the old person's account to buy his house. The house goes to the young person who bought the house. The deposit created by the loan goes to the old person. It's the young guy's $200,000 mortgage that created the deposit that funded the old person's savings. Okay, it's domestic credit expansion that funds savings. And they say the United States is borrowing money from China to fund our trade deficit, or Japan to fund our trade deficit. It's the other way around. I go in to buy a car for $20,000, I get a loan from Citibank, the loan creates a deposit, I give the deposit to Toyota. Citibank's loan funded Toyota's dollars. That goes to the Bank of Japan, they exchange it for yen, it becomes reserves. I get the car instead of the money, I'm happy, that's why I bought it, I wanted the car instead of the money. Citibank wanted the loan, that's what they're in business for, they're happy. And Japan wanted the dollars rather than the car, so they're happy. There's no imbalance. But domestic credit funded foreign savings. Domestic credit funds investment. I mean, investment is funded by credit, right? You go out and borrow money to build a factory that creates that much in deposits, you spend it, paying everybody, and that becomes their savings. The investment creates the savings in monetary terms, every time. There's no other place it can come from. Anyway, these are the main topics covered in the book. Investment adds to savings. When a business borrows money, and then spends it, that spending winds up in somebody's pocket as savings. The business has the debt, everybody else has the savings. Investment always has, investment is the savings. Savings equals investment as a number. But it's not the savings that causes the investment, it's the other way around, from the monetary point of view. And the last one, the myth is that it's a bad thing that higher deficits today mean higher taxes tomorrow. People say if we run a higher deficit today, we need to have higher taxes tomorrow. I agree. But the innocent front is that it's a bad thing when it's a good thing. Now why is that? So if we have a higher deficit today, that's going to cause the economy to do much better. Because that's going to add savings, it's going to add income to the economy. And this could be either through lower taxes if you're from the right, or higher public spending if you're from the left, or however you want to do it. I don't care. I mean, I do care, but that's not what this is about. That will cause the economy to expand, okay? Now, why would a government that understood everything I've been talking about ever raise taxes? To cool things down if they start to overheat. If suddenly there's too much money in the economy, too much credit, too much spending, and it's causing inflation, then you might say, okay, we need to do something about this, we're going to raise taxes. So yes, a large deficit today can cause the economy to get so good, it'll cause unemployment to get so low, that you make the decision to raise taxes to cool it down a little bit. Well, that's a good thing. Isn't that what we want? Don't we want an economy where everybody's working and making good money, but they're making so much, we want to take the edge off of it by raising taxes? Of course. Okay? So the answer is yes, the innocent fraud is that's a bad thing rather than a good thing. Oh, we raise the deficit today, there'll be more taxes tomorrow. We can't do that. Like, yes, you can. Please do that. Because you're only going to raise taxes if there's too much money. The government doesn't get money when it taxes, it just slows things down. It just changes the number down. You lose the money, the government doesn't get it. Okay, so in 47 minutes, sorry, I've gone over the highlights of the book. And then I'll leave it open for questions and answers, and we'll get into all the ramifications for the economy and for policy and whatever else you want to do. Thank you.